The caterer dropped an entire tray of champagne flutes when I walked into the ballroom. Not because of the dress, not because I was late, because of my arm, a sling, white linen. My right arm in a sling on the night of my own engagement party. My fiancé was already across the room when I came through the doors. I watched him see it, watched his jaw tighten for exactly half a second before he smoothed it back into a smile. Then he glanced at his mother, standing near the floral arrangements, and something passed between them. Not worry, not guilt, something that looked a lot more like confirmation. He raised his glass toward me from across the room. My name is Seren Adler. Yes, it's Welsh. Yes, my parents were academics. I'm 31 years old, a licensed structural engineer based in Denver, and that night I was supposed to be celebrating the happiest chapter of my life. Instead, I was calculating how long I had before the medication wore off, and whether I'd remembered to email the right person before leaving my apartment. I had. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I didn't meet my fiancé at a bar or a party or through an app. I met him at a zoning commission meeting 3 years ago, which tells you everything you need to know about how I spend my free time. His name was Fletcher. Fletcher Dunn. Fourth-generation Colorado family, the kind whose name appears on library wings and hospital pavilions. He wore a navy suit to a Tuesday evening public meeting and had opinions about drainage infrastructure that were genuinely well-researched. I was impressed. I shouldn't have been, but I was. He asked for my card afterward, sent a follow-up email that was professional, specific, and a little bit funny. Asked me to dinner somewhere that had cloth napkins but wasn't trying too hard. I remember thinking finally, a man who does what he says he's going to do. My mother loved him immediately. Said he was grounded. Said he came from good people. Said, and I remember this so clearly, that a man like that understands the value of things. I just didn't know yet which things he meant. The first crack appeared about 8 months in. I'd been tapped to lead a major bridge rehabilitation project downtown. The kind of thing that gets your name in the engineering trade publications, maybe some local press. It was a big deal. I told Fletcher over dinner, excited in a way I hadn't been about work in years. He said, "That's a lot of hours." I said, "It is, but it's a real opportunity." He was quiet for a moment. "Then you already work more than most of the women I've dated." I let it go. I told myself he was adjusting, that it was a learning curve, that he'd come around. He didn't come around, he dug in. Over the next year the comments compounded. Why did I need to answer work emails at dinner? Why did my coworkers text me after 7? Why did I mention my project lead by his first name? Did I think that was appropriate? He never yelled. Fletcher didn't yell. He asked questions in a measured tone that made me feel like I was the one being unreasonable for finding them unreasonable. My mother, when I tried to describe it, tilted her head the way she does and said, "He's protective, Seren. That's not a bad quality in a husband." I started editing myself. Checked my phone less at dinner. Stopped mentioning male colleagues by name. Told myself, these were small adjustments, the kind every partnership requires. They weren't small, I just couldn't see the full shape of what I was giving up yet. He proposed 14 months ago at a dinner with both of our families present. It was organized, orchestrated, photographed. His mother cried. My mother cried. I said yes because I was surrounded by people who loved me, and a man who was looking at me like I was the answer to something, and in that moment I believed it. I believed it for a while after, too. The engagement party was his mother's idea. 120 guests at a venue in Cherry Creek. His family's friends, his father's business associates, a handful of my colleagues, and my mother seated at the family table like she'd earned a place there. 3 days before the party, Fletcher and I argued. Really argued, not the quiet circling we usually did. He'd found an email on my work laptop. He'd been using it to print something, he said, from a colleague suggesting we grab coffee to discuss a potential collaboration. The email was 2 sentences long. My colleague is 54 years old and has 3 grandchildren. Fletcher's voice stayed low and even the entire time. That made it worse somehow, the control. When I finally said I was done discussing it, when I moved past him toward the door, his hand caught my wrist. I don't remember the exact sequence after that. I remember the edge of the counter. I remember the floor being closer than expected. I remember the sound before the pain, which is strange, because you'd think it would be the other way around. The ER doctor said it was a clean fracture radial head. He asked me carefully how it had happened. I told him I'd tripped. I could see in his face that he'd heard that before. He gave me a pamphlet anyway, slid it under my discharge paperwork without saying anything, and I folded it into my coat pocket without looking at it. Fletcher was in the waiting room when I came out. He stood up immediately, touched my face with both hands, looked at me with something that had been engineered to look like devastation. "I'm so sorry," he said. "I don't know what happened. You startled me." I didn't say anything. "We don't have to go to the party," he said. "We can cancel." And there it was. That option placed so carefully on the table. Cancel the party, stay home, let this disappear into a version of events we'd never speak about directly. His family wouldn't ask questions. Mine wouldn't either. I thought about that pamphlet in my coat pocket. I thought about my mother saying he's protective. I thought about 3 years of small adjustments stacked on top of each other like weight-bearing walls that had never been properly inspected. "We're not canceling," I said. He searched my face. "You sure?" "I'm sure." What I didn't tell him, what I'd been doing since the moment I got home from the ER and he'd gone to get food to prove how sorry he was that I'd made 2 phone calls. The first was to my friend Danny. She works in HR for a large tech firm, which means she has a practiced understanding of documentation, evidence preservation, and the specific kind of careful behavior required when something has to be done right the first time. She'd had concerns about Fletcher for months. She'd been waiting for me to be ready. She was ready the second I called. The second call was to a woman named Patricia Osei. She's a forensic accountant. She came recommended through a colleague I trusted, and she was expensive, and she was worth it. I'd hired her 6 weeks earlier after I'd started noticing things. Small things at first. A joint account we'd opened for the engagement that had more withdrawals than I remembered authorizing. A reference in a document to a property I'd never heard Fletcher mention owning. A name, Dunn Holdings LLC, appearing in a disclosure form for the venue contract his mother had sent me to sign. I hadn't signed it. I'd had Patricia look at it instead. The ballroom was everything his mother had planned. White orchids and Edison bulbs, and a string quartet in the corner, playing something understated and expensive. I walked in with my arm in a sling, and 120 people turned to look at me. Fletcher was at my side within seconds, hand at my lower back, smile deployed. "She had a little accident," he told the first cluster of guests. "Clumsy, this one." He laughed warmly. Several people laughed with him. My mother, from across the room, smiled in a way that was meant to be reassuring, but landed somewhere closer to compliant. I smiled too. I was very good at smiling by then. His father found us near the bar. Gerald Dunn, 70 years old, the kind of man who treats every room like a meeting, he called. He looked at my sling, looked at his son, and said, couldn't even keep her in one piece before the wedding. Then he clapped Fletcher on the shoulder and laughed, and 2 of the men standing nearby laughed as well. And I stood there in a $3,200 dress with a fractured arm, while the people around me found it amusing. That was the moment, that specific moment. I had been in rooms like this my whole career. Rooms where something about my presence was treated as optional, peripheral, decorative. I had learned to calculate in those rooms, to wait. To let the people who underestimated me keep underestimating me right up until the moment it cost them something. I was very good at waiting. Fletcher gave a toast about 40 minutes in. He was charming, of course. Fletcher was always charming in public. He talked about the first time he saw me at that zoning meeting, made it funny, made himself look like a man with a good eye for exceptional women. He talked about building a life together. He looked at me when he said it. I looked back. When he finished, his mother gestured to the venue's event coordinator, who dimmed the overhead lights and signaled the AV setup in the corner. They'd prepared a slideshow, engagement photos, candids, a few childhood pictures from both of our families. What they didn't know was that Danny had arrived 40 minutes earlier and spoken to the same AV technician. When the slideshow ended, I stepped forward. Fletcher's hand found my good arm, not gently. I kept walking. "I actually have something I'd like to add," I said, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, which surprised me because my heart was going very fast. "If you'll bear with me for a couple of minutes." The room went politely quiet. These were people who respected composed women with good diction. I was giving them both. "Fletcher said something tonight about building a life together," I said. "I've been thinking about that a lot this week. What it actually means to build something. What the structure looks like underneath." I nodded toward the AV corner. The screen behind me came back to life. The first thing it showed was an audio waveform. Then it played. Fletcher's voice. 3 nights ago in our kitchen, low and even and controlled, the way it always was, asking me why I needed to have friendships with men from work, telling me that the way I behaved reflected on him, telling me, and this part landed in the room like something had been dropped from a height, that I'd never had anyone take care of me properly before, and I didn't know what it looked like, so I kept mistaking his oversight for something it wasn't. Someone in the room made a sound, not quite a gasp, something more like recognition. The second clip was shorter. It was the moment before the counter, before the floor. I hadn't known Danny's app was capturing it. I'd forgotten she'd installed it on my phone months ago, after a conversation I'd have to test at the time. The audio was incomplete, but it was enough. The sounds was enough. I stopped the playback before it finished. Fletcher stepped toward me. His face was doing something I hadn't seen before. Not the controlled calm he usually maintained, but something underneath it showing through. "That's private," he said. "You have no right." "I also have a broken arm," I said, not loudly, "so I think we can discuss rights." His mother rose from her seat. "Seren, this is not the place, Patricia," I said. Patricia Osi stepped forward from the side of the room, where she'd been standing for the past 20 minutes, holding a manila folder. Fletcher saw her and went very still. I turned back to the guests. "Most of you know Fletcher through his family's real estate work," I said. "Some of you have done business with Dunn Holdings. I'd like to show you something his family's attorney filed 8 weeks ago in connection with a property debt consolidation." Patricia handed me the folder. I didn't open it dramatically. I just held it. 3 months ago, I was presented with a venue contract for this party that included a signature block for me as a co-guarantor on a liability that had nothing to do with venue costs. The underlying obligation was a refinancing instrument for a commercial property in Lakewood that's currently the subject of a creditor dispute. The room was absolutely silent. I had spoken in this particular register, precise, technical, unhurried, in front of planning commissions and city councils, and I knew what it did to a room. It made people listen, it made people worry. "I didn't sign it," I said. "I hired someone to look at it instead." I handed the folder to the person nearest me, a man I recognized as one of Gerald Dunn's longtime business partners. He opened it. His expression didn't change much, but the color left his face in a way that was visible from where I was standing. "The consolidated debt is significant," I said. "The creditor timeline is not public yet, but it will be. And the prenuptial agreement I was asked to sign last month included provisions that would have linked my professional income and existing assets to a joint holding structure." I paused. "I'm a structural engineer. I read load-bearing documents very carefully before I signed them." Fletcher said my name. Once, I looked at him. I thought about the pamphlet still sitting in my coat pocket at home. I thought about my mother saying he's protective. I thought about standing at that ER counter filling out forms while the doctor watched me with careful eyes. "This engagement is over," I said. His father stood up. "Now listen, Gerald." I kept my voice level. "Your son has a creditor problem and a documentation problem, and, as of this week, an assault charge that's been filed with the Denver Police Department. I let that settle. The detective assigned to the case has everything she needs. I'm not a variable in your financial planning anymore." The room didn't erupt. It didn't need to. The silence did more work than noise could have. Fletcher's mother looked at her son, not at me. She looked at him the way you look at someone when you're trying to understand what they've cost you, and I understood in that moment that she'd known some portion of this and had made her calculations accordingly. That was its own kind of answer. My mother was still seated at the family table. I walked over to her. She looked up at me with an expression I didn't have a name for, not shock, not pride, something more complicated and unresolved. "You should have told me," she said quietly. "You should have seen it," I said, gently, because she was my mother and I loved her, and neither of those things made her blameless. "I'm going to need some time." She nodded. Her lipstick was perfectly applied and her eyes were wet, and she didn't say anything else. Danny was waiting near the coat check. She handed me my jacket without any ceremony, and we walked out through the side entrance into the March air, which was cold and very clean, and smelled like rain that hadn't arrived yet. "How are you doing?" she said. I thought about it honestly. My arm ached. My hands were steadier than I expected. The medication was wearing off. "Ask me again in a week," I said. She drove me home. We ordered Thai food and watched something I couldn't tell you the name of now. and at some point she fell asleep on my couch, and I sat there in the quiet of my own apartment feeling something I didn't have words for yet. Not relief exactly. Something more structural than that. Like a load had been redistributed correctly. The assault charge moved through the system. Fletcher's attorney tried twice to contact me directly. My attorney handled both. Fletcher was required to complete a diversion program and is currently subject to a protective order. His family's creditor situation became public 4 months later when the Lakewood property went into receivership. I found out through a news alert the same way anyone else did. I finished the bridge project. It was written up in 2 trade publications and 1 local paper. My name is on the report. My mother and I have been talking. Slowly. It's not resolved, but it's moving, which is more than I could have said 6 months ago. She asked me once why I didn't tell her sooner. I told her the truth, that I'd tried to in smaller ways, and what she said back had made me feel like the problem was my perception and not his behavior. She was quiet for a long time. I didn't know I was doing that, she said. I know, I said. I didn't know I was letting it work. That was the hardest part to sit with, not Fletcher, not the arm, not even the party, or the 200 people who'd heard the audio clip and the financial disclosures, and had their own opinions about all of it. The hardest part was understanding the full architecture of how I'd gotten there, what I'd told myself, what I'd accepted, what I'd filed under necessary compromise. I'm careful now about the difference between adaptation and erosion. They don't feel the same from the inside, but they look similar on paper until you trace the load path all the way to the foundation. I kept my name, kept my apartment, kept the job. The bridge opens to traffic next spring. Some things hold because of how they're built, and some things only looked like they were holding.